Two police officers arrested me in my driveway, right as I was about to take out the trash. My wife Claire stood on the porch in her bathrobe, arms crossed, watching everything unfold like it was just another Tuesday. She didn't cry, she didn't shout. She just said, "You should have told me the truth, Ethan." My name is Ethan Cole. Claire is, or was, my wife. We'd been married for 6 years, built a home together from nothing, survived job losses, grief, and long nights filled with hope. I loved her with everything I had. So when I heard the charges, fraud, identity theft, emotional manipulation, I couldn't even speak. It was like someone else's nightmare had been pinned to my name. Claire told the police she found evidence in my old laptop, documents and photos linking me to victims across the country. The kicker, her best friend Sabrina helped her piece it all together. But I knew one thing even then, none of it was true. And I had a terrible feeling. Claire wasn't just misled, she might have planned this from the start. Claire wasn't just the love of my life, she was the reason I believed I deserved love in the first place. We met in a bookstore in downtown Denver, both reaching for the same copy of East of Eden. She laughed and let me have it, even though I could tell she wanted it more. I offered coffee as a peace treaty, and somehow that turned into hours of conversation about books, broken families, and what it meant to start over. I told her small truths that day, just enough to seem open. But I kept the bigger ones to myself, the ones about my past. Claire came from old money, the kind of family that still expected arranged marriages in the 21st century. She was engaged to someone she didn't love, a man her parents approved of because his last name held enough weight in social circles. But Claire had a rebel's heart. The more they pushed her, the more she pulled away. And when she found out her fiancé had cheated, she used it as the excuse she needed to break everything off. That's when I came in. I didn't swoop in like a knight in shining armor. I just stood still when everything around me was falling apart. I listened. I drove her to therapy. I let her cry on my shoulder at 3 a.m. without offering solutions. For someone like Claire, who had always been told what to do, how to act, being with someone who simply let her be was everything. We moved in together within 6 months, scandalizing her parents. I expected her to flinch when she found out about my past 2 years in juvenile detention for identity theft when I was 17. But she didn't. She asked questions, she listened. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "That boy doesn't sound like the man I'm looking at now." It was the first time I let myself believe I could actually outrun who I used to be. Together, we started a small business, an online platform that helped connect freelance designers with nonprofits. We weren't rich, but we made enough to pay the bills and buy secondhand furniture we proudly restored. Every small win felt like a triumph. We celebrated everything. Our first real client, our first 5-star review, the first time we made enough in a month to splurge on steak instead of pasta. Claire was the visionary. I handled operations. She made us dream. I made it work. We were a team. More than that, we were partners in every sense of the word. We talked about kids. We adopted a rescue dog, Murphy, and treated him like our training wheels for parenthood. We built rituals, Tuesday takeout, Sunday walks, no phone nights with wine and board games. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. "What?" I'd ask. She'd just smile and say, "Nothing, just glad it's you." I used to think that moment, her smile, the softness in her eyes, was the safest place in the world. Now I know better. What made it feel real was how we handled the hard days. When Claire's mother got sick, I drove 4 hours after work to bring her soup and sit beside her at the hospital even when Claire couldn't be there. When our business hit a slump and we couldn't afford rent, Claire took on freelance writing jobs at night, while I picked up shifts at a warehouse. We weren't perfect, God knows we argued, over finances, over our future, over whose turn it was to walk Murphy, but we always came back to each other. Our fights never ended in silence or slammed doors. They ended with late-night talks, sleepy apologies, and the promise to try harder. I think that's why her betrayal cut so deep. It wasn't just the lies or the police or the humiliation. It was that I had once looked at this woman and thought, she'd never hurt me. We used to be unbreakable, or so I believed. Looking back now, I wonder if I missed the signs. If maybe, just maybe, I loved her too blindly to see what she was capable of. I wanted to believe the hardest part of our story was behind us, that we had survived the worst. But now, thinking back, I realized something else entirely. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They started small. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They started small. Claire began coming home later than usual, always with a vague excuse. Traffic, meetings, deadlines. She'd toss her bag on the couch, kiss me on the cheek like it was routine, and disappear into her office with a glass of wine. I told myself not to worry. Business was rough. We were all stretched thin. At first, I chalked it up to burnout. Claire had always been intense about work, and the pressure of trying to grow the company while keeping our bills paid had worn both of us down. So I started picking up more of the slack, handling the client calls, cooking, cleaning, walking Murphy, anything to keep things smooth. But then it shifted. She stopped asking for my opinion on decisions. She started making them alone, changing our pricing model, rebranding our website, and firing a longtime freelancer without discussing it with me. When I brought it up, she brushed it off. "It's just easier this way," she'd say. "You've got enough on your plate." I didn't want to fight. I convinced myself this was just a phase, that couples went through seasons. Maybe this was ours. Then came Sabrina. Claire's best friend had recently moved back into town after a messy divorce and needed a place to stay just for a few days. Claire insisted we help. I agreed. How could I not? Sabrina moved into the guest room, but somehow her presence filled the entire house. She'd make little comments at dinner, jokes that didn't quite feel like jokes. "Wow, Ethan, you sure know how to disappear during the day." Or, "Claire, remember when you used to dress up for dinner?" Claire never laughed, but she never defended me either. I started noticing things going missing. Emails I knew I had sent never reached clients. Files were moved, renamed. My calendar was suddenly filled with appointments I didn't remember booking. I thought I was losing my mind. Or worse, burning out. One evening, I overheard Claire and Sabrina whispering in the kitchen. When I walked in, they went quiet. I asked what was going on. Claire looked at me like I was overreacting. "We were just talking about a client issue," she said, but the air felt heavy. There were nights I'd wake up and find Clara scrolling through her phone in the dark, her face lit by that cold blue glow. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say, "Just work stuff," and roll away. I wanted to trust her. God, I did. So I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was dealing with something she didn't know how to talk about. Maybe Sabrina was just stressed and projecting. Then one day I saw it, my laptop open in the kitchen, Sabrina standing over it with a USB drive. When she noticed me, she smiled, too quickly. "Just borrowing the charger," she said, though the charger was on the floor. I didn't say anything. I told myself not to cause a scene, but I started locking my laptop after that. Password protecting files, changing my email logins. That's when the tension escalated. Claire accused me of being secretive, of hiding things. "Why are you locking your computer now?" she asked one night. "Are you hiding something from me?" I froze. "You've been distant, Claire. You don't talk to me anymore." She laughed. "You're the one acting like a stranger." That night, I lay awake wondering when she had stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as a suspect. I didn't know it then, but Sabrina had been collecting moments, out-of-context screenshots, recordings of our arguments, bank statements printed with red pen circles, things I hadn't realized were even being watched. The worst part? Claire never asked me about them. She just watched. And silently, she began to believe. Looking back, I wonder how long she had doubted me before I even noticed. How many nights she lay next to me, already believing I was someone else entirely. I kept thinking love was a fortress, that it could withstand suspicion, silence, slow erosion. But love built on trust can collapse without a sound. And mine already had a crack in the foundation. The confrontation wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. Claire waited until after dinner, when the dishes were stacked and Murphy was curled on the rug. She stood by the fireplace, holding a folder in her hands. The kind you get from an office supply store, cheap but ominous when it's out of place in your living room. "I need you to sit down," she said. I did, heart pounding, unsure why my legs were shaking. Sabrina stood in the corner, arms crossed, silent. Claire opened the folder and began laying down photographs. At first, I didn't understand. They were old, grainy. Most were of me, smiling, talking, standing beside women I didn't recognize. Some photos looked staged, others candid. Then came screenshots of emails, Facebook messages, even PayPal receipts. She spoke slowly. "This woman says you dated her under the name Jason. This one says you promised marriage, then disappeared. This one lost $10,000. All of them tell the same story, Ethan. I stared, mouth dry. I don't know these people. Sabrina stepped forward. We traced the IPs. Some were logged from your laptop, others from locations you were known to be in. You used multiple identities, fake emails, alias accounts. That's not possible, I whispered. But Claire wasn't listening. She pulled out a printed statement, one from a woman named Lauren, who claimed I ghosted her after she wired me money for a fake investment. Attached was a photo of me. At least, it looked like me. Taken from an angle that felt invasive, like I'd been followed. I didn't do this, I said. Claire, you know me. I thought I did, she replied, voice shaking. I turned to Sabrina. Where did you get this? She found it on your laptop, Claire answered. An old backup file, buried in a folder labeled receipts. There were photos, names, even passwords. I couldn't breathe. That's not mine, I never. Claire held up her hand. Don't. Just don't. She walked into our bedroom and returned with a duffel bag. I need you to leave. I looked between them. You're kicking me out? Without even letting me explain? Her face hardened. You can explain to the police. Something in her tone made my blood run cold. Sabrina moved toward the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, a pair of squad cars was already parked across the street. Claire didn't flinch. They've been waiting. I asked them to give us a few minutes. I stood, stunned. You called the cops on me? Claire nodded. I gave them everything. The drive, the statements. I didn't want to believe it either, Ethan, but it's all there. My mind screamed. My mouth stayed shut. I didn't fight as the officers walked through the door and read me my rights. Claire didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stood there and watched. And Sabrina? She smiled. That was the last thing I saw before they shut the cruiser door. Her smile. They drove me in silence. I stared at the back of the headrest, mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My life had been dismantled in under 10 minutes. No shouting, no violence, just a calm, calculated extraction, like I was being removed from a story I no longer belonged in. At the station, they processed me like any other suspect. Fingerprints, mugshot, a steel bench in a freezing cell. No one yelled. No one threatened. The quiet made it worse. I asked for a lawyer. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn came, I was finally allowed one phone call. I dialed a friend, Brandon, who worked freelance cybersecurity. He was the only one who might believe me. Jesus, Ethan, he whispered. It's all over Reddit. They posted screenshots, stories from victims. There's even a video clip going viral. Claire's name isn't mentioned, but this looks bad. I clenched my jaw. It's not me. I swear to you, Brandon, this is a setup. He hesitated. Can you prove that? I didn't answer. The detective questioning me later seemed almost disappointed. We're still verifying everything, he said, but the amount of corroborating evidence is substantial. I asked him where they got it. He told me it came in a sealed envelope, dropped off anonymously at the precinct 2 days prior. That meant Claire had been planning this long before the confrontation. She'd orchestrated the whole evening down to the timing of the arrest. She hadn't just reacted to the evidence. She had delivered me to them. It was a kind of betrayal I didn't know how to process. We had built everything together, our business, our life, our future, and she dismantled it all like it was never real, like I was never real. When they finally let me go on bail, thanks to Brandon and his emergency retainer, I stepped out into the morning sun and didn't know where to go. I had no home, no job, and worst of all, no truth anyone would believe. But deep down, even in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Someone wanted me erased, and I was going to find out why. Later that night, sitting alone in a dingy motel room, I opened my old backup drive, the same one Claire claimed held all the incriminating data. I'd kept it stored in the cloud years ago, forgotten in a private archive. When I looked through it, nothing matched what they'd shown me. The folder labeled Receipts wasn't mine. The metadata on the files Claire printed didn't align with my device history. Something was off. And then it hit me. Someone had replaced or fabricated the contents, planted them so cleanly even Claire believed them. Or maybe that was the point all along. Because if you want to destroy someone completely, you don't need to kill them. You just make the world believe they never were who they said they were. That night, I stopped being confused. I got angry. Really angry. Getting out on bail didn't feel like freedom. It felt like exile. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway, the kind where the front desk clerk doesn't ask for your real name, and the walls were thin enough to hear the next room's regret. The room smelled like bleach and despair. I hadn't packed a bag, hadn't thought to bring clothes. I had nothing except a charger, a dead phone, and my mind, racing, fragmented, screaming. The internet had already tried and convicted me. Posts calling me a predator. Old clients are suddenly canceling projects. Anonymous trolls are digging through my online presence like vultures. I watched as my LinkedIn, my business site, and even my Venmo were flooded with comments. My inbox held threats, demands for refunds, and curses from people I'd never met. I couldn't breathe. I didn't eat for 2 days, just stared at the ceiling fan and let my thoughts spiral. How had it all unraveled so fast? Was Claire really that convinced? Was Sabrina that cruel? Could someone have actually gone to the trouble of fabricating an entire digital history just to destroy me? The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a coincidence. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was surgical. Whoever did this knew where to hit me. My past, my laptop, my business history, my marriage. It wasn't messy. It was precise, calculated, intentional. On the 3rd day, Brandon visited me. He brought takeout and coffee and set his laptop on the table like we were about to solve a mystery. I didn't even look up. I went through the files Claire gave the police, he said. The ones she showed you. How? I croaked. I still have admin access to the backup system you used, remember? I helped you set it up years ago. The drive that supposedly had all the receipts. I pulled the metadata. I sat up, my chest tight. And? They've been tampered with, he said simply. The documents? Created recently. Their timestamps were modified, but not perfectly. Whoever did it wasn't sloppy. But they weren't perfect either. I blinked. So, they were planted? He nodded. Absolutely. Someone either replaced the files on your drive or created an identical folder and synced it through a spoofed account. Either way, it wasn't you. My head swam. Where would someone go that far? I whispered. Brandon hesitated. That's the question. I thought maybe someone from your past. But this feels recent, personal. It's someone close. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, allowed the thought I'd been trying to bury rise to the surface. What if Claire didn't just believe the lie? What if she needed it? Over the next few days, Brandon helped me build a timeline. We cross-referenced the appearance of each victim's statement with public data. Most came from burner accounts or unverifiable email chains. One woman who supposedly gave a statement had no digital footprint at all. Another was using stock photos as her profile picture. The illusion had depth, but not truth. We traced the IP addresses from the submitted documents to Claire's home Wi-Fi. That alone wouldn't hold in court. It could have been anyone on the network. But we dug further. One of the data packets showed login credentials that had previously belonged to Sabrina. That was the crack. The more we looked, the more it became clear Sabrina had access, motive, and the means to carry out the entire operation. But we still didn't know why. Was it jealousy, revenge, or something Claire promised her? What haunted me most was that Claire had seen the same inconsistencies. She had to. And still, she chose to hand me over. One night I sat at the motel desk and wrote out everything I remembered. Conversations, timelines, words Claire had said that now carried new weight. I wasn't just grieving a lost marriage. I was preparing for war. But beneath the rage, something more dangerous was growing. Clarity. I wasn't the broken one. Someone else had broken something sacred. And I was going to make them answer for it. That same night, I opened a blank document and wrote one word at the top. Why? It wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. I needed to understand the intention behind the lie. Why had Sabrina gone through so much trouble? Why had Claire stayed silent when the truth must have been screaming in her face? The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't about guilt or justice. It was about control. And I was done being the one controlled. It started with one IP address. Brandon dug it up late one night while I was asleep on the motel floor with a hoodie over my face. He shook me awake, eyes lit with caffeine and something sharper, certainty. I found it, he said. Or at least, I found where the file sync originated. He spun his laptop toward me. A map of activity logs blinked on the screen. This right here, this is the spoofed upload. It came from Claire's Wi-Fi. That's not unusual. You both lived there, but look closer. He zoomed in. The device wasn't yours. It was a MacBook. You've never owned one. But Sabrina has. The dots connected in my mind like a slow burn turning into a spark. Can you prove it was hers? I can prove it used a device tied to her Apple ID, Brandon said, and I pulled the MAC address. That's unique. It wasn't enough for the police. Yet. But it was enough for me. The next few days became a blur of strategy. Brandon helped me build a secure digital trail, one that would hold up if we ever needed to go public. We cataloged everything: telephones, metadata, Wi-Fi logs, even fragments of deleted files from my own drive, showing signs of remote tampering. But what we needed wasn't just technical proof. We needed a voice. A human one. One of the victims listed in the supposed dossier Claire handed over was named Alice Garrett. Her story was one of the more damning ones. She'd allegedly wired me $15,000, 0 cents, for a fake housing investment in Seattle. According to the documents, she'd filed a police complaint that had been quietly settled. Her statement was full of emotion, betrayal, shame, heartbreak. But when Brandon ran a search for her name, there was only one match in the entire country: a speech therapist in Colorado. No social media presence, no lawsuits, no mention of financial fraud, just one Yelp review from a grateful parent. I reached out through her clinic's website using a fake name and email. I didn't tell Brandon. 2 days later, Alice replied. She agreed to meet in a neutral public place, a bookstore cafe in Boulder. I drove 4 hours in silence, rehearsing what I'd say. What if she screamed? What if she ran? What if she were part of it? But when I arrived, Alice was already there. Mid-30s, calm eyes, sipping tea. You're the guy, she said as I sat down. Not Jason, right, Ethan? I froze. So, it was real? She shook her head. No, that's what I wanted to tell you. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email. It was from someone named Kelly Roberts, claiming to be an investigative journalist researching online dating scams. The message asked Alice to participate in a feature story and describe a hypothetical romance gone wrong using a provided prompt. Just fill in a few details to match your background, the email said. It's for awareness. Alice thought she was helping a cause. I never said I was scammed, she said. I described a fake scenario, like the email asked. Next thing I knew, someone called me saying I might be asked to testify. I was terrified. The email address bounced back after 2 days, dead, untraceable. It wasn't journalism. It was a trap. I thanked her, profusely, gave her Brandon's number in case anything ever came of it. Then I drove back through the mountains, wind roaring past like a warning and a promise. Sabrina hadn't just faked evidence. She'd invented people, coerced them into becoming part of a lie. When I showed Brandon the email, he paled. This is enough to build a chain of fabrication, he said. Not enough for court, but enough to blow this wide open online. That night, we made a decision. We were going to expose the truth, digitally, publicly, methodically. But first, we needed one more piece of the puzzle. A confession. Or a leak. And I had a plan to get one. We set up a dummy email address posing as an anonymous whistleblower and sent it directly to Sabrina, attaching a blurred screenshot of the fabricated documents and a caption, "Nice work, but it's unraveling." 2 hours later, she clicked the link we embedded. Brandon tracked the IP and screen recording in real time. She opened the email on her personal device, panicked, then deleted it within seconds. But that moment told us everything. She knew she was exposed. Now, all we had to do was wait for her to panic again. And when she did, we'd be ready to catch it all. We didn't go to the police first. We went online. Brandon and I built a digital report, simple, clean, indisputable. It included side-by-side screenshots showing metadata inconsistencies, the spoofed IP address, the planted files, and Alice Garrett's video statement confirming she'd never been scammed, only manipulated into fabricating a story. We uploaded the report to a private server and created a video breakdown, narrated in my voice, walking viewers through the deception step by step. No rage, no accusations, just facts. Then we sent the link to 3 places at once: a subreddit dedicated to exposing online fraud, a journalist who had previously covered identity manipulation cases, and the general inbox of the company Claire and I built together. We clicked send at exactly 10:01 a.m. on a Monday. By noon, it had over 50,000 views. And that was before the real bomb dropped. I hadn't been back to the office since the day I was arrested. But I still had shares in the company, enough to request a shareholder meeting, enough to walk through those glass doors one more time, this time not as a pariah, but as someone with proof. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. Claire had no idea I was coming. When I entered the conference room, the murmur of voices stopped cold. Claire was at the head of the table, dressed in black, poised as ever. Her expression didn't falter, but her knuckles tightened around her pen. I sat across from her. "Good to see you, Claire," I said. "It's been a while." Around the table, board members exchanged awkward glances. Most of them had stayed silent during the fallout, waiting for the dust to settle. Today, they were about to choke on it. "I called this meeting," I said, "because there's been a development regarding the accusations made against me. I think it's time we look at some evidence that wasn't included in the original discussion." Brandon connected his laptop to the projector and played the video. 5 minutes, that's all it took. By the end, you could hear a pin drop. Then I said the part that made Claire flinch. "Claire, I know you saw the inconsistencies. I know you looked past them because this narrative served a purpose. It gave you a clean exit, it gave you the company, and it gave Sabrina a reason to help." She didn't deny it. Not immediately. But she did lean forward. "You think I planned this?" I met her gaze. "I think you recognized a way out and chose to take it. I think when Sabrina brought you the fabricated evidence, you didn't question it, because it solved your problems. Even you lied to me for years, about who you used to be. And I paid for it," I said, "but I never lied about who I became. You just stopped caring." A board member cleared their throat. "Is this true?" they asked Claire. She didn't answer. "Not directly," she said. "The company belongs to those who protect its integrity. I did what I thought was necessary." Another silence. Then the head of the legal committee stood. "We'll need to investigate this immediately. Sabrina has been working in a freelance advisory role. If she's involved in fraud, we're liable." Claire's mask cracked for just a second. "You think I knew?" The room didn't answer. They didn't have to. Outside that glass room, the video had gone viral. Ethan Cole wasn't a scammer, he was a survivor of one. I left before the meeting ended. Back in the parking lot, my phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists, influencers, messages of apology, strangers thanking me for speaking up. But the one message that stood out came from a blocked number. It was a screenshot of an old text from Claire to Sabrina. "If he ever gives you access, save everything. You know what we talked about." I showed it to Brandon. He exhaled slowly. She didn't just allow it, she engineered it. That night, I uploaded the final piece, a side-by-side of the text and the folder timestamps. The caption was simple: "Some betrayals aren't spontaneous, they're strategic." The response was instant. Claire's name trended for the first time, not as a founder or innovator, but as a manipulator. Articles were written, podcasts picked it up, and Sabrina? She disappeared from social media. But I wasn't done. I sent a copy of the full report to the company's board, to my attorney, and to a Fraud Victims Alliance. The truth wasn't just out. It was undeniable. And I hadn't raised my voice once. 2 days later, I received an official email from the board. Claire had been asked to step down pending internal review. Her access to executive systems was suspended. Sabrina's name was formally removed from the company's website. Legal counsel was preparing for what they called a reputational containment strategy. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in destroying someone else's kingdom. But there was power in reclaiming what they tried to steal from me. Not the company. That's the narrative. But my name. For the first time in weeks, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a villain or a victim. I saw a man getting his story back. The first official consequence came for Sabrina. The day after the expose went viral, a cybercrime unit from the state attorney's office reached out to Brandon. They asked for access to our files, metadata logs, IP traces, timestamped screenshots. We handed them everything. 3 weeks later, Sabrina was subpoenaed. Turns out she had done this before, on a smaller scale, to a former employer who rejected her romantic advances. That time, the evidence didn't stick. This time, it was ironclad. She was charged with falsifying digital records, obstruction of justice, and defamation. Her court date was set for the fall. When they came to take her laptop, she reportedly said, "I was just trying to help my friend." But the world no longer believed her. Claire, on the other hand, didn't face handcuffs. She faced silence. The board stripped her of her title within a week. Investors pulled out of their pending expansion deal. Her face disappeared from the company's website. She wasn't charged with a crime, but her name became synonymous with complicity. Public opinion was unkind. The woman who had once been praised for resilience and business savvy was now viewed as a cautionary tale. Comments flooded old interviews. Clients quietly walked away. The tech world didn't cancel her outright, it just stopped calling. One afternoon, she appeared outside the motel where I was still living. I didn't recognize her at first. She wore no makeup, no sharp blazer, just jeans, a hoodie, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. "I just want to talk," she said. I let her sit on the bench outside the lobby. I stayed standing. She spoke first. I didn't know how far she would go. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe, if I believed it hard enough, it would make sense. I wanted out, Ethan. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine anymore. And you thought framing me was the way out. Her throat bobbed. I didn't frame you. I just let it happen. There it was. The truth behind the silence. "I never wanted it to destroy you," she whispered. "I just wanted to be free." "You could have left," I said. "People leave every day. They don't all commit character assassination to do it." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel satisfaction, just sorrow. "I'm sorry," she said. "I really am." I nodded once. "I know. But I can't carry your regret." We sat in silence for a long time. Then she stood up. "I'm going away for a while, somewhere. No one knows me." "Good," I said. She hesitated. "If you ever—" "I won't," I interrupted gently. "Whatever we had, it's not something I can go back to." She didn't argue. She just nodded and walked away. That was the last time I saw Claire in person. Later I heard she'd sold her condo, deactivated all her accounts, and left the city. No press release, no goodbye. Just a woman stepping off the grid, too ashamed to stay, too proud to beg. And me? Stayed in the motel a little longer. Not because I had to, but because healing needed silence too. Sometimes I'd see posts speculating about what happened to her, forums debating whether Claire deserved more blame or less, whether forgiveness was an option, but I stayed out of those conversations. I didn't need closure. What I needed was distance. Sabrina would go to trial, Claire would disappear, and I would rebuild, not for revenge, but for the man I was before everything fell apart. That, to me, was justice. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I left the city 3 months after everything ended. Not in the middle of the night, not running, but with a quiet resolve. I packed only what I needed, a few clothes, my laptop, a folder of signed court statements, and a worn-out notebook filled with thoughts I wasn't ready to delete. I moved to a smaller town by the coast, far from the noise of tech hubs and city scandals, a place where people greeted you on the street and didn't Google your name before shaking your hand. Brandon and I stayed in touch. With his help, I launched something new, a platform called Clean Slate. It offered digital forensics for victims of defamation, tools to document and trace manipulation, and legal consultations for those being silenced online. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection, prevention, empowerment. We didn't promise miracles, but we did promise to listen. Every time I saw someone submit a request for help, I remembered what it felt like to scream into the void and hear nothing back. That memory guided me, not as a scar, but as fuel. I didn't speak publicly about Claire, or Sabrina, or the company. The people who mattered knew the truth. The rest could decide for themselves. I found peace in smaller things, long walks at sunrise, books I never had time to read before, learning how to make my own coffee instead of ordering it in a rush. For the first time in years, I felt clean. Not redeemed, not vindicated, just honest. I met people who didn't know my past, and when they asked what I did, I told them the truth. I help people take their names back. Most nodded. Some smiled. One woman asked, "Like a digital knight?" I laughed, something like that. But I never dated. Not seriously. Love, for me, had become a more complex equation, one that required truth, vulnerability, and a shared willingness to stay when things got ugly. I didn't resent love, but I no longer chased it like a cure. And then, one day, it came. Not love. An email. From a name I hadn't seen in months. Subject line, "Can we talk?" The body was empty. Just those 4 words. No apology. No anger. No punctuation. Just a door left slightly ajar. I stared at it for a long time. My cursor hovered over reply. I thought I was already dead, but I didn't type anything. Instead, I closed the tab and opened another request from a woman in Oregon who said her ex was spreading lies about her online. I read every word, and I wrote back, because some people still needed help. And I was finally someone who could offer it. Later that evening, I watched the waves crash against the rocks and thought about everything that had unraveled, not just around me, but inside me. There was a time I believed the truth alone could save a person. Now I knew better. The truth matters, yes, but so does patience. So does choosing yourself, even when you want to be chosen. If Claire ever truly wanted to talk, she'd have to start with the truth, not a question. And maybe then, I'd listen. But for now, I had work to do. And I was okay with that. The kind of work that begins where pain once lived.